There are some stories passed on throughout the history of the e-world, and told again and again to new generations. This is one of those stories. This is the untold story of Ajay Bruno. He has been called many things, a hero to some, villain to others, but he remains one of the great mysteries in the history of the e-world. He was born in the United States of America on April the 29th, 2009. Much would be said of this new addition to eRepublik, but one thing was for certain: the e-world would never be the same. Bruno's career started off well. In fact, it was much like that of any ambitious new player. He quickly joined the Conservative Party, then the third largest party in the USA, and one which initially embraced young Bruno with open arms. He quickly became active in the media, writing in his paper, the Patriot Post, one which would go on to write numerous top 5 international articles and achieve media mogul acclaim. In the Scrabman administration, this young star of the political world was quickly noticed, and on May 10th, 2009, was appointed as the American ambassador to Canada, one of the most prestigious ambassadorships in the country. On May 25th, Bruno was the official Conservative Party candidate in the state of Colorado, then a Q4 hospital region, and an extremely impressive assignment for such a young player to be entrusted with winning. In a time where mobile voters played a role only in very close races, Bruno managed to put up an impressive 12 votes against AAP incumbent Congressman Eng Abanda, who received 13. It is likely that the party would have aided him with mobile voters if it was not for a shocking and horrific case of voter fraud committed in this election. The Libertarian Party candidate, a recent immigrant named Phinia, shocked the political world by winning with 18 votes. Bruno accused Phinia of using multis, and was proven right when just a few short days later, Phinia was permanently banned from multiing. This was perhaps the pivotal moment which forever affected the destiny of the e-world as we know it. As we know, instead of becoming a young congressman and rising star of the political establishment, Bruno would soon face a much different fate. Despite this setback, Bruno continued to be active within the party and was soon named the assistant vice president when Matos 5 succeeded longtime party president Desert Falcon on June 15th. Even as controversy began to rise, Bruno had managed to rise to be the third-ranking party officer in just a month and a half. Bruno had previously announced, shortly after Phinia's ban, that he intended to take the same seat in the June 25th congressional elections. Matos 5's administration agreed to this request, but by this time, Bruno's reputation had begun to deteriorate, something which would become apparent in his second attempt to become elected to the U.S. Congress. Unfortunately, in this election, Bruno finished a fairly distant third. He had been blamed for going too negative in the prior election, and because of this, the Libertarians and AAP both moved massive numbers of votes to guarantee his defeat. Bruno rival Daphne Lilac, one of Claire Littleton's top lieutenants, was dispatched to deal a blow to Bruno's political aspirations, but this young conservative leader was down, but far from out. 3 days before the congressional election, Bruno had filed the necessary paperwork to be included on the primary ballot for the Conservative Party nomination for the presidency of the United States. Despite the party establishment supporting Gaius Julius, and the leadership trying to encourage Bruno to drop his candidacy, he ran a thorough campaign and fell just short of the majority needed to secure the nomination. The other candidates included Conservative Party members Rain and Dodger Catcher, as well as Libertarian Party President and Bruno arch-rival Claire Littleton. In order to avoid a no-endorsement result, Rain agreed to endorse Bruno, and as per the rules of the CVP primary, the 55% he now had from both camp supporters was enough to secure him the nomination. You may be wondering why they would allow this to happen. Not surprisingly, they did not. Accusations of ballot stuffing and voter fraud were levied against the Bruno campaign. While these were never proven or substantiated, it was used as an excuse to throw out the results, and a new primary was held where Emmerich, the only real-life convict ever to be U.S. president, was chosen in his stead. This was the moment where irreparable and permanent damage was done to the party, and its loyalties would remain forever divided. It was at this moment that Ajay Bruno and Matos 5 would collide in an epic struggle for the future of the Conservative Party. By this time, the fight over real-life politics and religion had reached the boiling point on IRC, and powerful members of the political elite vowed to bring this into the game and use it as an excuse to sabotage Bruno's political career. While signs of this were first seen in the June congressional elections and presidential primary, the July 15th Conservative Party presidential election signaled the moment at which tensions reached a new height that would capture the attention of the USA and the world. Leading up to the election, Bruno had managed to win an astoundingly high percentage of the party faithful over to his cause. Concerned by the behavior of the party, leadership, and the recent poor electoral performances by the party, polling by the American Survey Organization showed that this was certain to be a tightly contested fight for the future of the party. On the day of the election, the other parties, as well as foreigners, as this was before the introduction of citizenship, came to vote for Matos 5. Bruno put up a record number of votes in a Conservative Party election, but the vote inflation caused an unheard of 120% turnout, at a time when 50% would have been the norm. While many of the perpetrators of this horrendous political takeover have long since left the game, one of the ringleaders, the notorious James Pfeiffer, known today as Henry Arundel, was among those who moved a substantial number of votes to PTO the Conservative Party, a tactic he would repeat many times against Bruno and his supporters over the next few years. Enraged over the PTO of the Conservative Party, even more members were won over to Bruno's cause. A large exodus of members occurred, and the Conservative Victory Party was born, one which was dedicated towards winning victories for conservative ideals and principles. It quickly became the sixth largest party in the country, and even gained its first congressman, Max Payne 50 of Georgia, in the July congressional elections. This new party began to challenge the Conservative Party as it began to rise at the expense of its mother party's fall. Throughout the month, a former member of the Conservative Party leadership, Jackson Leith, had vowed to PTO the Conservative Victory Party. Despite this threat looming over the heads of the party, they soldiered on without fear. The presidential elections of August 5th were among the most contentious in the history of the USA. Bruno finished fourth, but put up 331 votes, a respectable tally for such a new party, and a player still gaining the widespread recognition he would one day have. Sadly, despite the enthusiasm and passion of its members, a massive PTO occurred on August 15th, and Jackson Leith quickly renamed the party, and even quit the game the day after his illicit victory. The entire campaign had been despite one person for their real-life beliefs, a true tragedy in a nation where liberty and freedom were supposed to be cherished. It was at this moment, after it became clear that not only were people with different views unwelcome in existing parties, but that they would not be permitted to create and build their own, that Bruno decided to head to South Africa, along with some of his friends and supporters. Unfortunately, the American elites had already poisoned the South Africans with propaganda about Bruno and his political faction, and they were ill-received by the South African regime. Several American trolls, such as Gino Garin and Amun Nefer, even followed Bruno here to cause a nuisance, and Pfeiffer made a multi specifically to cause Bruno problems in his new homeland. It seemed as if the hatred would cross an ocean. Bruno and his allies formed the Conservative Democratic Alliance, later renamed the African National Alliance. This party reached third place at its peak and had close to 70 members. Despite being a very diverse party of both South Africans and new immigrants, they were always treated as a pariah in the country. Bruno would go on to be elected twice to the South African Congress, joined by a fair number of the members of his party in the September election. Although their power in the Congress was severely limited, they were always viewed with unwarranted suspicion by most of the other Congress members. Despite the propaganda and the odds stacked against them, Bruno ally and party vice president Max Payne 50 managed to acquire about a quarter of the vote in the September election, with almost as much support in the subsequent month coming from Philip Francis Xavier Esquire's candidacy. South Africa was a nation of reverse apartheid, where a minority, albeit a large one, was politically oppressed. Sadly, Bruno's last 2 months in eRepublik only continued down the same path that had started in the USA. While his political base of support in South Africa was better able to defend itself than in the USA, it was simply implausible to fight back against the American government interfering in South African elections, and many of the South African natives never trusting these new immigrants, who had given much-needed economic and military support to a country that had spent months under foreign occupation. One of the mistakes that Bruno had made was having 4 accounts in different countries, and attempting to become party president of an American, Australian, and South African party all on October 15th. This mistake would cost him all 4 accounts, and on October 18, 2009, Ajay Bruno, Barnabas Stinson, Silas Benjamin, and Barack Obama were all banned from multi-accounting. Bruno freely admitted that this mistake was made later on, and pointed out that he never used multiple accounts for financial gain or multi-voting, but just to play in multiple countries. Despite this, and the fact that more prominent players had used multis in far more egregious ways, this reputation would stick with him for years, and even to this day, it is often commonplace to refer to many of his supporters as simply multis, despite no evidence to support these claims. There was much more to this story, and many more tales to be told, but this is how it all began. A series of judgments, lies, and misunderstandings, which led to one player being labeled as the greatest villain in the history of the United States, if not the world. It presents a lesson to be learned, and a reminder to us all that before we take the word of those with axes to grind, to always learn the untold story.